Hello everybody, this is Behemoth Dan and this is another Behemoth Deck Tech. I'm going to do this video a little different than the last one. Rather than trying to focus my camera on the play area, I'm just going to put the cards up on the screen so it's a lot easier to read. I'm still going to be basing this off decks that I currently have built, but I really want to focus on, as I mentioned before, card interactions and play styles and ways to pilot the deck. That way you can decide if this is a deck that you might like, or give you some ideas for decks that you currently have built. As you can see, today we're building around Marchesa the Black Rose. Now, this version of Marchesa is usually less popular than Queen Marchesa, but I feel this one has a whole suite of fun abilities to build around, and I much prefer it. This is a Grixis commander, giving you access to blue, black, and red. What she does is she has Dethrone, and she gives all your other creatures Dethrone. Now, Dethrone came from Conspiracy, and it says when this creature attacks the player with the highest life, or tied for the highest life, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then whenever a creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter on it, put it back into play at the beginning of your next end step. So we're going to focus on a couple key points on how we build Marchesa the Black Rose. First thing is, we obviously want creatures that work well with +1/+1 counters. We want creatures that have a enter the battlefield effect, or a leaves the battlefield effect. Alright, so I'm going to start with one of the best cards in this deck, and it is Unspeakable Symbol. And if you've never seen Unspeakable Symbol before, I don't blame you. It's a card that essentially lets you put +1/+1 counters on your creatures at will, in exchange for paying 3 life. Now this serves us in two different ways. It makes sure that we can get +1/+1 counters on our creatures. It also allows us to get our life total to not be the highest on the board. One of the challenges with Dethrone is if we're going heavy beatdown, we may end up having the largest life total and then we can't get our Dethrone triggers. So Unspeakable Symbol gets us our counters and can bring our life total back in line with other players, allowing additional Dethrone triggers to happen. Drana, Liberate of Malakir, is a vampire ally that has First Strike, and the ability that says whenever she deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. Since she has First Strike, you're going to get the counters on your creatures before they do damage, and it's a way to make sure that your creatures can come back with Marchesa's ability even if you have the highest life total. Let's talk about some of the creatures in the deck that can protect themselves by providing their own +1/+1 counters. If you've been playing Commander for a while, you might be familiar with the two cards on the right, Marchesa the Unhallowed and Triskelion. These two cards are an infinite combo by themselves. If you can stick both these creatures and no one can do anything about it, you win the game. Marchesa gives all your non-human creatures +1/+1, and they have Undying. And Undying says when a creature with Undying dies, if it had no +1/+1 counters on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter. Now by itself, that's a nice combo with Marchesa to make sure things come back if they don't have a counter, and then Marchesa will bring them back if they do have a counter. Triskelion comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters that you can remove one to deal 1 damage to a creature or a player. What you can do is you remove a counter from Triskelion to deal damage to a player, and then you remove the next 2 counters from the original, his original 3 to ping himself. So he dies without any +1/+1 counters on him. Then he'll come back with 4. So then you remove 2, ping a player, remove the last 2 to ping himself, so he dies, and he comes back, and you repeat that until you've killed the table. I'm going to go over these next 4 cards fairly quickly. Scourge of the Throne is a dragon that has Dethrone itself. And by the way, Dethrone triggers stack, so he'll get his trigger and Marchesa's trigger. He says whenever he attacks for the first time, if he's attacking the person with the highest life, or tied for the highest life, there's another attack step and you get to untap all your creatures. Ob Nixilis gets counters whenever a creature dies. Plus, he punishes your opponent for searching their library by making them lose 10 life and sacrifice a creature. This works great for people running a lot of fetch lands or tutors or whatever it might be. Kroxa is one of the newer Elder Giants that has a enter the battlefield effect or an attack effect that makes opponents discard cards and lose life. This works well with Marchesa because you'll get a couple triggers each turn because he's not always going to be escaping. And Olivia Voldaren can bite other creatures to turn them into vampires, pinging them for 1, and getting a +1/+1 counter on herself, and then she can steal vampires, which is great. Now let's highlight some of the creatures that have great enter the battlefield effects. And the one I want to spotlight right from the get-go is Flayer of the Hatebound. This is a 4/2 devil that has Undying, so he'll bring himself back if he doesn't have a +1/+1 counter, and then he will give himself a +1/+1 counter, which works great with Marchesa. The important part is that it says whenever Flayer of the Hatebound or another creature enters the battlefield from your graveyard, that creature deals damage equal to its power to any target. This allows all your Undying creatures or any of your Marchesa creatures that come back to play at the end of turn to start shooting things. If you need to kill off creatures or kill players, all those Marchesa triggers become particularly deadly, which is just wonderful. Warstorm Surge is another great card in the deck because it plays the same role as Flayer of the Hatebound. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, deals damage to its equal to its power to any target. Double it up with Flayer of the Hatebound and you're just going to start clearing the board or killing opponents. The next 3 cards are all about getting creatures into play without paying for their mana cost. Sneak Attack and Purphoros, the Bronze-Blooded, both have the effect of being able to pay mana to put a creature into play and giving it haste. The downside is you have to sacrifice it at the end of turn. Obviously that's not a problem for us if it ends up with a +1/+1 counter and Marchesa brings it back from the dead. Ilharg, the Big Pig, lets us put a creature into play, tapped and attacking, and then it goes back to your hand at the end of turn. However, since this deck does have some sack outlets, or maybe something will die if it blocks it, it's not that big of a downside for us. All playing into Marchesa's dethrone triggers and her ability to bring creatures back from the graveyard. If there's one card in this deck that most people will go, what is that? Is Fleshwrither. This is a great piece of tech that most people have never seen. He's from Future Sight, and he's a 3/3 that costs 4 mana. He has the ability to pay 3 mana to sacrifice himself to go search for a creature with the same converted mana cost as himself, which is 4, and put it into play. Now, you ask, what can we tutor for? Well, in my list, we can tutor up for 9 different creatures. Olivia Voldaren, Disciple of Bolas, Solemn Simulacrum, Glenelendra Archmage, Hostage Taker, Chainer, Nightmare Adept, Zhao Dun the One-Eyed, Dax Duplicant, and Purphoros, God of the Forge. All creatures that have great utility that Fleshwrither can go find for us and then put into play. Plus, if he's got a +1/+1 counter on him, at the end of turn, he'll come back from Marchesa's effect, and then we can use him again to get something else. Sidisi, Undead Vizier, and Diabolic Intent serve the same purpose. They have you sacrifice a creature to tutor up for whatever cards you want. Usually we're okay with our creatures dying because they're going to come back into play at the end of the turn anyways. We have a couple other good cards that play along with our synergy that I want to talk about. First 2, let's highlight Grave Pact and Attrition. Grave Pact says whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. Plus, you can, with Attrition, you can pay a black, sacrifice a creature to destroy a target non-black creature. By themselves or doubling up, you can get a lot of your opponent's creatures off the board so you can push through your damage. The next three creatures we're looking at are Kiki-Jiki, Mirror Breaker, Zealous Conscripts, and Deceiver Exarch. Even by itself, Kiki-Jiki is great with all of our creatures that have Enter the Battlefield effects. With Zealous Conscripts and Deceiver Exarch, either one of those creatures turns Kiki-Jiki into an infinite combo by untapping Kiki-Jiki, allowing you to make more copies of either Zealous Conscripts or Deceiver Exarch, and then just swing out with an infinite number of creatures. Obviously, Kiki-Jiki always has a target on his forehead because he's so powerful, but we can protect him with a lot of our recursion effects and Marchesa's ability, and it's a great way to finish the game if that's the route you end up needing to go. To wrap up, there's a lot of other great cards in this deck. You have the usual things you'd find in this type of deck, like Necropotence or Bolas' Citadel, great card advantage, and ways of lowering our life total. You're going to find things like Cyclonic Rift and Living Death, stuff that you would expect from this type of deck. And we also have things like Garuda and Blasphemous Act, and a lot of other utility cards. I really recommend you checking out the list, and think about giving Marchesa the Black Rose a try. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of the changed format, showing cards on the screen rather than my play area. I hope you liked it, and have a wonderful day.